I never thought I would see something like that in my own backyard. It was past midnight when I woke up to a strange sound. Metal scraping against the earth, a rhythm too deliberate to be the wind. At first I thought it was just a stray animal digging through the flower beds, but when I pulled the curtain aside, the moonlight revealed something that froze my blood. My daughter-in-law Clara was in the garden, still wearing her beige coat, her hair sticking to her face with sweat, her hands trembling as she dug into the soil beside the lavender bush. My son used to plant those flowers every spring. That's why I knew exactly where she was standing, the spot where he used to kneel with the sunlight in his hair, humming an old tune while pulling weeds. That same spot where we had buried his ashes 2 years ago. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from gasping. The shovel's metallic echo cut through the stillness like a scream. Clara was muttering something under her breath. I couldn't hear it clearly through the window, but I caught fragments. No one will know I have to do this. Forgive me. She stopped digging after several minutes and reached into a black plastic bag. My stomach twisted when I saw what she pulled out, a small, dented metal box. It wasn't new. Its corners were rusted, and something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in the world of the living. I watched as she placed it into the hole, covered it carefully with soil, then pressed her palms against the ground as if sealing a grave. Her movements were frantic, desperate. Then she looked around, her eyes darting toward the house, and for one horrifying second, I thought she had seen me. I stepped back from the curtain, heart pounding so hard it hurt, but she didn't come inside. She just stood there, staring at the mound of dirt, breathing heavily before whispering something I could barely make out. It's done. When she finally walked away, I stayed by the window, frozen. My mind couldn't process what I had just seen. Clara, my late son's wife, the woman I had promised to protect after his death, had just buried something secret in our garden, on the same soil where my son's ashes rested. Why there? Why now? And what could possibly be in that box that made her choose this hour, this place? I waited until her bedroom light turned off. Then, barefoot and shaking, I stepped outside. The air was cold enough to make my joints ache. The garden smelled of wet soil and fading lavender. Every step toward the spot felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The ground was freshly disturbed. I could still see the faint imprint of her hands. I crouched down, pressing my fingers to the dirt. It was still warm from her touch. The moonlight reflected off something metallic, buried shallowly beneath the surface. For a moment I considered digging it up right then, but the fear of what I might find paralyzed me. My son Louis had been dead for 2 years. A car crash, they said. The police called it an accident, though I had always felt something about that night didn't make sense. Clara cried so hard at the funeral that even the priest's voice broke. Afterward, she moved into my house, claiming she couldn't bear to live alone. At first, I believed it was grief. But over time, I began to notice small things. The late-night phone calls she quickly ended when I entered the room, the hidden envelopes she burned in the fireplace, the way she flinched every time someone mentioned Louis's insurance money. Now standing over that patch of earth, everything began to connect in ways I didn't want to admit. The garden, the box her whispers about, forgiveness. It all felt like a confession I wasn't meant to witness. I whispered to the darkness, "What did you do, Clara?" The night pressed closer around me. A branch cracked somewhere behind the shed, and I spun around, clutching my robe to my chest. No one was there, only shadows shifting with the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by Clara, but by my son. I looked down at the mound again, my throat tightening. It was as if Louis himself was buried twice, once by fire, and now by betrayal. I knelt, tracing the soil with trembling hands, and that's when I saw it, faint letters scratched into the metal edge of the box, barely visible under the dirt. I leaned closer, squinting in the moonlight. It said just 2 words, "Forgive me." My breath caught in my throat. The shovel marks the whispers. The trembling Clara wasn't hiding trash or a keepsake. She was burying a sin. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, clutching my chest as my heart pounded like it was trying to escape. I wanted to call the police to tell someone what I'd seen, but what would I even say? That my daughter-in-law buried a mysterious box in the garden at midnight and carved an apology into it. They'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I forced myself to go back inside, but the image of her silhouette under the moon kept replaying in my head. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table staring at the window. The garden looked peaceful now, untouched, innocent, but I knew better. There was something under that soil, something that could destroy everything. When I finally tried to sleep, I couldn't. Every creak of the house made me flinch. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside again, but when I looked, nothing moved. The next morning, Clara acted as if nothing had happened. She made coffee, smiled faintly, even hummed while feeding the cat. I watched her carefully, every gesture rehearsed. She asked if I'd slept well. I said nothing. I just stared at her hands, the same hands that had been covered in dirt hours earlier. Later that afternoon, when she went out to run errands, I went back to the garden. The sun was bright, but the patch of soil looked darker than the rest, as if it refused to dry. I took a small hand spade and began to dig, but after only a few inches, I realized something terrifying. The box was gone. The hole was there, but empty, just loose, damp soil. Someone had moved it. My blood turned cold. Had Clara come back during the night to retrieve it? Had she seen me watching? That evening, I tried to confront her casually. "Clara," I said, keeping my tone light, "did you go outside last night? I thought I saw lights in the garden." She froze mid-step, her smile fading for half a second before she recovered. "No," she said too quickly. "You must have been dreaming." But her eyes betrayed her. They darted toward the window, the same direction as the lavender patch, and then back to me. I wanted to press her further to demand an explanation, but something in her look made my stomach drop. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. That night, as I sat alone again, I realized there was no going back. Whatever was buried in that garden had already started to dig its way into me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't think. Only one thought kept echoing in my mind: that box was meant to stay hidden, and I had seen something I was never supposed to see. I looked at the dark garden through the window one more time. The lavender swayed gently in the wind, brushing against the soil that had swallowed a secret. And for the first time since my son's death, I felt him there. Not in the flowers, not in memory, but in the silence, heavy and waiting. Something inside me whispered, "Find it, Helen. Find the truth before it's too late. If you were me, would you dig it up? Comment 1, if you would, or hit. Like if you'd walk away and pretend you never saw a thing." The morning after that sleepless night, I stood by the kitchen window clutching my cup of tea, staring at the garden like it was a crime scene. The lavender shimmered under the sunlight, pretending to be innocent. But I knew better. Something had been buried there, and now it was gone. Clara was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, perfectly calm. "You're quiet today," she said without looking up. "Did you not sleep well again?" Her tone was polite, but there was a sharpness underneath, like she already knew I hadn't. I forced a smile. "A bit restless, that's all. You know how the house creaks at night." She nodded without interest, sipping her coffee, the silver spoon clinking against the cup. Every sound felt like a taunt. When she finally left for work, I waited until her car disappeared down the dirt road. My hands shook as I reached for my old gardening gloves and a small trowel. I needed to know the truth. Outside, the air was warmer than usual for early autumn. The sun hit my shoulders as I stepped onto the damp soil. The garden looked peaceful, deceptive in its quiet. I knelt where I'd seen Clara digging. The soil was looser there, darker still, slightly damp. I pushed the trowel in and began to dig, careful not to make a mess that she might notice later. Each scrape of metal against dirt felt like peeling back the skin of a secret. After just a few inches, I found something, a thin scrap of paper pressed against a root. I pulled it free, brushing off the dirt. It was soaked and torn, but I could still make out a few words in faded ink. Willis 2018. My breath caught. A will. My son's will. I sat back on my heels, the world spinning around me. Lewis's will had vanished after his death. The lawyer, Mr. Geller, said Clara had it last. She claimed she lost it in the confusion of the funeral, that Lewis had never finished updating it anyway. But here, buried in our garden, I was holding a piece of it. My heart pounded as I read the next faint line. "If anything happens to me." The rest was smeared illegible. I pressed the paper to my chest. So it was true. Clara had lied. She hadn't lost it, she'd hidden it, and she'd done it under my son's ashes. My knees gave way and I sat there in the dirt shaking. The betrayal felt like a physical wound. For a moment I thought of calling the police, but then reason crept in. What would I tell them? That I found a scrap of paper with the word will on it. They'd laugh. Clara was too careful, too clever. If she was hiding this, she had already covered her tracks. I tucked the fragment inside my cardigan pocket and looked around the garden. That's when I noticed something strange. A few feet from the lavender bush near the fence, the soil looked disturbed again, as if someone had walked there recently. I walked closer and found the imprint of a shoe, small, narrow, unmistakably Clara's. She had moved the box, but where? The idea that she had come out again after I went back to bed made my skin crawl. Had she seen me watching? Did she move it because she knew I would look for it? My thoughts spun in circles until I felt dizzy. Then out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of movement at the edge of the property. Mr. Geller, my neighbor for more than 20 years, was trimming his hedges. I hesitated for a second, then walked over. "Morning, Helen," he greeted me, adjusting his glasses. "You're out early." "I could say the same for you," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You're still keeping busy, huh?" He chuckled softly. "Routine keeps me alive. And you? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, debating whether to tell him, but something in his eyes, sharp observant, made me trust him. "Can I ask you something, Frank?" I said quietly. "Do you remember when Louis died? You handled his will, didn't you?" His smile faded. "I was the one who drafted it, yes. Clara and Louis came to me together about 6 months before the accident." "Was there ever a final version?" He paused, his hand tightening on the hedge trimmer. "Yes, but only Clara came to pick up the signed copy. She said she'd file it with the family records. She didn't," I said, my voice trembling. "It's gone. Disappeared right after the funeral?" He frowned. "That's odd. It was a legitimate document, witnessed and everything. Louis was very specific about certain things." "What things?" "I can't disclose everything, Helen. You know how it works, but—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "I can tell you this: Louis didn't want Clara to have full control of his estate. He insisted that if anything happened to him, a large portion should be set aside for future children. That's what we wrote in." The words hit me like lightning. Future children. Louis and Clara had never had kids. She claimed she miscarried a few months before his death. But now, hearing this, I wasn't sure if I believed her anymore. "Do you still have a copy?" I asked urgently. "I might," he said slowly. "I'd have to check my archives. But Helen, if Clara really took that, well, you need to be careful. She's a smart woman, and desperate people do dangerous things." I nodded, though my hands were trembling too hard to hide. "Thank you, Frank. Please, if you find anything, let me know. This stays between us." He agreed, but his face was lined with worry as I walked back home. I could feel his eyes on my back the whole way. Inside, I went straight to the sink and washed the dirt from my hands, watching the water turn brown as it swirled down the drain. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, pale, tired, haunted. For the first time, I felt afraid of Clara, not just suspicious afraid. When she came home later that day, I tried to act normal. She was in an unusually good mood, humming as she unpacked groceries. "I bought you those biscuits you like," she said, holding up the bag with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet of you," I replied, pretending to read the newspaper. My pocket felt heavy with the folded scrap of paper hidden inside. As she cooked dinner, I noticed something else. The sleeves of her blouse were rolled up and faint scratches lined her forearms, thin, red, fresh. My eyes followed them before I could stop myself. She caught me looking and quickly pulled the sleeves down. "Gardening accident," she said casually. "The rose bushes attacked me again." I forced a smile, my voice thin. "You should wear gloves next time." She laughed, but her eyes stayed locked on mine a moment too long. The air between us turned heavy, tense, like two people holding the same secret, but pretending not to. That night after she went to bed, I took out the scrap of paper and laid it flat on the table. The words, "Will 2018, stared back at me, faint but undeniable. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, "Louis, what were you trying to tell me?" Outside, the wind began to rise. The lavender swayed, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move near the fence, a flash of pale light, then nothing. Maybe it was just the moon. Maybe not. But one thing was clear now. Clara hadn't buried something meaningless. She had buried evidence, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out what she was hiding. If you were in my place, would you confront her or keep digging in secret? Comment 1. If you'd confront her, hit, like if you'd keep the secret to yourself. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes. I hadn't really slept. I had just drifted in and out of restless thoughts, my mind replaying the same image, Clara's hands pressing dirt over that metal box. The scrap of paper I'd found was now sealed in a small plastic bag inside the teapot I never used. I knew it was absurd, but I couldn't risk keeping it anywhere obvious. Clara had a habit of cleaning every corner of the house when she was anxious, and I had learned the hard way that nothing escaped her curiosity. At breakfast, she was radiant, almost glowing. Her hair was neatly brushed, her blouse crisp. She moved around the kitchen like she was rehearsing for a role. "I'm meeting a friend for brunch," she said, casually pouring herself another cup of coffee. "I might be gone a few hours." I nodded without looking up. "That's nice. Anyone I know?" Her pause was almost imperceptible. "Just an old friend from nursing school." That word nursing scraped at something inside me. Lewis had mentioned once that Clara had studied nursing for a semester before quitting. She had claimed it was because she couldn't handle hospitals. But now I wondered if that was just another lie. When she left, I waited exactly 10 minutes before locking the door behind her. Then I dialed Mr. Geller's number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice rough but alert. "Helen, I was just about to call you." "You found something," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I did," he replied, lowering his voice. "I went through my old client records. You were right, I still have a scanned copy of Lewis's will. I shouldn't share this, but..." He hesitated. "You deserve to know." My heart began to pound. "Tell me." He took a deep breath. Lewis wrote that in the event of his death, Clara would receive a limited monthly allowance from his estate. The majority of his savings, insurance, and properties were to be held in trust for any future children. I felt dizzy. "That can't be," she said. "She lost the baby before he died." "I remember she told me that too," he said quietly. "But the will was never amended after the supposed miscarriage. Lewis came to me 3 weeks before his death asking about legal custody laws. He was worried about something, but he didn't explain. 3 weeks before the accident, I repeated. He didn't tell me a thing. He looked..." Unsettled, Geller continued, like he wanted to say more but couldn't. He mentioned feeling watched. Then just like that, the next time I heard his name was in the obituary. I clutched the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "Do you think she..." "I don't know," he interrupted gently. "But I do know this, after his death, Clara came to my office and requested all copies of the will. She said Lewis had changed his mind but never formalized it. I had no reason to doubt her. I gave her the originals." My throat went dry, and then she buried them, I whispered. "Maybe," he said grimly. "Maybe not all of them. She could have destroyed them or hidden them somewhere else. Either way, the timing doesn't look good." A silence stretched between us. I could hear the ticking of the clock in my living room, every second sharp as a blade. Finally, Geller spoke again. "Helen, I want to help you, but you have to be careful. If she suspects you know something, she might try to..." The line crackled, then died. My heart skipped. I stared at the phone, pressing redial, but it went straight to voicemail. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too still. That afternoon, Clara came home earlier than expected. She walked in with grocery bags and a wide smile. "I brought you your favorite soup mix," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "You've been looking tired lately, Mother. You should rest more." Her voice was kind, too kind. I forced myself to nod. "You're thoughtful." She smiled. "You know I try." Then, as if casually, she added, "I saw Mr. Geller at the cafe earlier. He told me you two had a chat." I froze. "Oh yes, we ran into each other. He's a kind man." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes did something strange. They hardened just slightly. "He said you were asking about Lewis's will." The air left my lungs. "Well, I was only curious. It's been years, and I was wondering how those things worked." She laughed lightly, but there was no humor in it. "You always were sentimental, Helen, but you shouldn't worry about the will. Lewis didn't have much. I've already taken care of everything." Her words were casual, but the meaning behind them was a warning. She knew I was digging, and she didn't like it. That night, I sat in my room, lights off, listening to her footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, deliberate, almost predatory. I could hear her pause outside my door once, then move on. When the creaking of the floorboards faded, I let out a shaky breath. My body trembled not from fear, but from anger. The next morning, I walked over to Mr. Geller's house, but his blinds were shut. I knocked. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. I waited on his porch until a delivery man came by and mentioned casually, "Oh, Mr. Geller left town last night. Said it was a family emergency. Left town without calling me back." My gut twisted. Something was wrong. When I got home, Clara was sitting in the living room reading a magazine. "You've been busy lately," she said without looking up. "I went for a walk," I replied. She smiled faintly. "That's good. Exercise helps clear the mind. You've seemed distracted." I stared at her. "Where's Mr. Geller?" She looked up, feigning surprise. "Why would I know that?" "I thought you might," I said, my voice trembling, despite my effort to keep calm. Her smile widened. "I think you're worrying too much. Maybe you should talk to someone about your memory. It's normal at your age." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Sweet, condescending, like a daughter talking to a senile parent. I clenched my fists beneath the table. Later that day, while she was in the shower, I went through her study. It felt wrong, but I didn't care anymore. Every drawer I opened smelled faintly of lavender and disinfectant. Everything was too neat, too organized. Then inside a folder marked Receipts Taxes, I found something that made my blood run cold. A transfer record dated 3 days after Lewis's funeral. A deposit of $350, 000 from his life insurance policy into Clara's personal account. She had said she didn't want the money, that it made her sick to think about it. But the paper didn't lie. My hands shook as I took photos of the documents with my phone, careful to put everything back exactly as it was. I was almost done when I heard the water shut off. My pulse spiked. I barely made it to the kitchen before she came downstairs, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. "Oh," she said with a smile. "You're still up." "I couldn't sleep," I said. "I was making tea." She walked closer, her expression unreadable. "You know, Helen, I've been thinking. Maybe we should move. The house feels heavy with memories." "Move?" "Yes. Sell it, start fresh, somewhere quiet. Wouldn't that be nice?" Her tone was soft, but her eyes were sharp. The garden was visible through the window behind her, sunlight falling on the lavender bush. I realized then what move really meant. She wanted to erase everything, every trace of what she had done, including the ground where she had buried her secret. I forced a thin smile. "You might be right, but not yet. This is where Lewis rests." She tilted her head, studying me. "Of course. I'd never do anything without your blessing." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept replaying Geller's words in my head, the insurance record the will meant for a child who never existed, or perhaps existed, and was taken away. Everything pointed to one truth: Lewis hadn't just died. Someone had made sure he wouldn't stand in her way. I didn't know how much Clara suspected, but I knew she was watching me. Every word, every glance, every move felt like part of a silent game neither of us acknowledged, but both understood. And I also knew one thing for certain: games like that only end when one player is gone. If you were in my place, would you go to the police or keep gathering proof until you had everything comment one? If you'd go now or hit, like if you'd wait for the perfect moment. The days that followed blurred together into a haze of tension and silence. Clara was changing, or maybe she had always been like this, and I was only now seeing her clearly. She moved through the house like a shadow, quiet, polite, but with eyes that never stopped watching. Every time I turned around, I felt her gaze on my back. She no longer hummed while she cooked. She no longer called me Mother. She had replaced it with a colder, distant Helen. It was subtle but deliberate, as if to remind me that I was no longer family, just an obstacle. One morning, I went to pour myself a cup of coffee and noticed the mug I always used had a hairline crack running down the side. A small thing, meaningless to anyone else. But I knew I hadn't dropped it. I stared at it for a long time before setting it down and choosing another. When Clara came into the kitchen, she smiled at me, sweet as ever. Careful with that cup, she said, taking the cracked one from the counter. You don't want to hurt yourself. The way she said it made my stomach twist. Later that day, I tried to call Mr. Geller again. His number was disconnected. I even checked online for local news, half expecting to find an obituary, but there was nothing. It was as if he had vanished completely. The thought made my chest tighten. If Clara had found out he'd help me, maybe he hadn't left town on his own. I began writing everything down in a small notebook, the insurance transfer, the fragment of the will, every odd word Clara had said. It was the only way to feel sane, to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. But even that felt dangerous. I kept the notebook hidden in a box of sewing supplies somewhere Clara would never bother to look. On the third night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were soft but deliberate creaking on the old hallway floorboards. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound stopped right outside my door. My heart hammered in my chest. I waited, barely daring to move, until I heard the faint click of the light switch in the hallway. Then silence. The next morning, when I went to make the bed, I noticed my door latch had been turned upside down. The small metal piece had been unscrewed and reattached backward. I stood frozen, staring at it. Why would anyone do that unless they wanted to open the door from the outside, even when it was locked? My hands began to shake uncontrollably. At breakfast, Clara acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, asked if I wanted toast, then mentioned casually that she'd had trouble sleeping. I must have walked around during the night, she said, buttering her bread. Sorry if I woke you. Her eyes met mine, daring me to call her a liar. I said nothing. That afternoon, my old friend Evelyn stopped by unannounced. We'd known each other since our nursing days, though we hadn't spoken much since Lewis's funeral. She was one of the few people who still checked on me. You look pale, she said the moment she saw me. Are you all right? I hesitated before answering. It's been tense. Clara and I aren't seeing eye to eye lately. Evelyn frowned. That girl always gave me a strange feeling. Too calm, too polished. What's going on? I wanted to tell her everything, the buried box, the will, the threats hidden in polite smiles, but the words stuck in my throat. I just think she's hiding something, I said finally. Evelyn took my hand gently. Helen, you need to be careful. You're alone in that house with her. You're vulnerable. If you ever need a place to stay, you come to me. Promise me. I nodded, but deep down I knew I wouldn't leave. Not yet. Not until I had proof. When Clara came home and saw Evelyn's car pulling out of the driveway, she stood at the door with a faint smile, making new friends, she asked. Old ones, I replied. Evelyn came to check on me. How sweet, she said, her tone too smooth. Though it's funny, isn't it? How people worry about you so much? I mean, they must think you're fragile. I'm fine, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. Are you... Because lately you seem... forgetful. Distracted. I caught you boiling an empty pot yesterday. That never happened, I said sharply. Her eyes gleamed. Maybe not. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe you did. I walked away before I could say something I'd regret, but her words clung to me. She was planting seeds, trying to make me doubt myself. And it was working. The next few days were a slow unraveling. My mail began disappearing before I could collect it. The lights flickered at night, though only in my room. I found my medication bottles, rearranged, the labels peeled off. When I confronted Clara, she just shrugged. You probably misplaced them. I started feeling dizzy, more often lightheaded after dinner. It wasn't until one night, when I watched her pour me a cup of tea, that I realized she was always the one preparing my drinks. The next evening, I switched our cups when she wasn't looking. She didn't drink hers. She just smiled, watching me over the rim of her glass of wine. My blood turned cold. The following morning, Evelyn called. Her voice was urgent. Helen, are you all right? Clara came by my house last night. I froze. She what? She said you'd been acting strange, forgetting things. She asked if I'd noticed anything concerning. Helen, she's trying to make people think you're losing your mind. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Did you tell her anything? Of course not, Evelyn said. But you need to do something. This isn't normal. You should go to the police. I looked out the window at the garden, the place where all this had started. The lavender was blooming again, the soil smooth and undisturbed. It looked peaceful, but it wasn't. It was a tomb. Not yet, I whispered. Not until I know what she's done. That afternoon, Clara invited a local social worker for tea. She introduced her with a bright smile. "This is Sandra. She helps families when an elderly parent needs support." I sat frozen as the woman smiled kindly. "It's lovely to meet you, Helen. Clara tells me you've been under some stress lately." "I didn't ask for any help," I said coldly. Sandra glanced at Clara. "We just want to make sure you're safe. Maybe a doctor's visit would be a good idea." Clara placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's just routine, Mother. You know how you've been forgetting things." "I haven't forgotten anything," I snapped, shrugging off her touch. Sandra looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we can reschedule this conversation." She left soon after, her polite smile tight, her eyes full of pity. As the door closed, Clara turned to me, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You see how easy it is, Helen? A few phone calls, a few words, and soon everyone will think you're losing your grip. Maybe they'll even decide you're not safe here alone." My throat went dry. "You wouldn't dare." Her smile was razor thin. "Wouldn't I? You're tired, confused. Everyone can see it. You talk about ghosts, about things that never happened. You're becoming a danger to yourself. Maybe it's time for you to rest." That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of rain tapping against the window. My mind was a storm. Every word she'd said played on repeat. She wasn't just hiding something, she was dismantling me piece by piece, turning everyone around me into witnesses to my supposed madness. Around midnight, I crept downstairs, driven by something between desperation and fury. I opened the drawer where she kept her papers and found a new folder labeled Property Valuation, Hughes Residence. Inside were photos of the house, the garden, and several documents from a real estate agency. She was planning to sell. I turned another page and froze. There was a letter from a lawyer dated just 2 weeks earlier. It read, "Upon the successful sale of the property, the remaining assets from Lewis Hughes' estate will be transferred to your private account as per your management request." My knees almost gave out. She wasn't just erasing my son's memory, she was cashing it out down to the last brick of his home. I felt something inside me harden. She wanted to destroy every trace of him. I wasn't going to let her. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I turned. Clara stood in the doorway wearing her silk robe, her face half shadowed. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. I quickly closed the folder. I was looking for some papers. "Of course you were," she said, stepping closer. "You've been so forgetful lately. Maybe you should stop looking through my things before you get hurt." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but her eyes glinted like steel. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled faintly and walked past me to the kitchen. "Tea?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't speak. I could only watch her move, graceful, precise, like a predator, confident her prey was already trapped. When she finally went back upstairs, I locked myself in my room and cried not from fear, but from rage. She thought she could silence me. She thought I was weak. But she had made one mistake. She underestimated how far a mother will go for her child, even one who's gone. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence in bold letters across a new page. "If she wants war, she'll have it. If you were me, would you fight back or run before it's too late? Comment 1 if you'd fight or hit, like if you'd escape while you still could." I used to think grief was the worst kind of loneliness, that nothing could be emptier than losing your only son. But I was wrong. The real loneliness is being alive, while everyone around you quietly decides you're insane. It's hearing your own voice and wondering if it still sounds believable. That's what Clara did to me, slowly, methodically, like tightening a noose, one loop at a time. By the end of that week, I was barely sleeping. The phone rang constantly, but it was never for me. Neighbors stopped dropping by. Even Evelyn's daily calls became less frequent. When I finally reached her, she sounded uncomfortable. "Helen, sweetheart, Clara came to see me again," she said softly. "She told me you've been having hallucinations, that you think Lewis's spirit is trying to warn you." My throat went dry. "You don't believe her, do you?" There was a pause, then a hesitant sigh. "Of course not, dear, but you have to admit you sound different lately. Maybe you're just tired." I hung up before she could say more. It wasn't her fault. Clara was too good at this. She was weaving a narrative around me, thread by thread, until everyone would believe that I was the problem, and she was too close to succeeding. The next morning, I found a pamphlet slipped under my door, Oak Ridge Assisted Living, a peaceful home for seniors. The logo smiled up at me, all soft blues and flowers. I knew who had put it there. I went downstairs, clutching it like evidence. Clara was in the kitchen, dressed immaculately as always, pouring orange juice. "You dropped something outside my room," I said, placing the pamphlet on the counter. Her smile didn't waver. "It's just an option, Helen. You've seemed so overwhelmed lately. Maybe being somewhere peaceful would help you rest. I'm not leaving this house." Her tone turned syrupy. "I know it's hard to admit when we need help." "I don't need help," I snapped. Her expression shifted just for a second, but in that moment I saw the truth. She wasn't worried about me. She wanted me out. She wanted me erased. The following days became a blur of humiliation. She began inviting people into the house, social workers, neighbors, even a doctor, each of them with the same concerned tone, asking the same polite questions. "Are you eating enough, Helen? Are you sleeping? Do you ever feel confused or unsafe?" Unsafe. The word hung between us every time. I wanted to scream, "Yes, I'm unsafe. I'm living with a liar, a thief, maybe even a murderer." But I knew what would happen if I did. They would nod pity me and take me away. That night, I sat in the living room staring at the photos on the wall. Louis, as a child, holding his first fishing rod. Louis on his wedding day, eyes full of light. The man in those photos was gone, and the woman who had stood beside him was now quietly erasing him from existence. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry, my love. I should have protected you from her." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked solemnly, marking each passing second like a heartbeat. It had belonged to my husband. Before he died, he used to wind it every Sunday, his old hands moving with care. I hadn't touched it in years. But that night, as the minute hand reached 12, the clock let out a low mechanical groan, a sound I hadn't heard before. I walked over and placed my hand against the wood. The panel on the side felt loose. A memory flashed in my mind, the last thing my husband said to me before he passed. "If anything ever feels wrong, Helen, check the clock." At the time, I thought he was delirious from medication, but now, staring at the slightly uneven panel, I realized he had meant it literally. I pulled the side open. Inside, the hollow space was filled with dust, but tucked in the corner was a small, folded envelope, yellowed with age. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. It was addressed in his handwriting, "For Helen, only if you need to know." I sat on the floor and unfolded it. Inside was a short letter and something else, a sealed plastic sleeve containing several papers. The letter read, "Helen, if you're reading this, it means things have gone terribly wrong. After Louis married Clara, I began to notice inconsistencies in her stories, her finances, her background. She was hiding debts. When I tried to confront her, she became defensive. I fear she may not be who she claims to be. If anything happens to Louis, look for the original will. I've hidden one copy inside the safe deposit box at Belmont Bank under your maiden name. The key is taped behind the photo of us at the lake." My breath caught in my throat. Behind the photo of us at the lake, our wedding photo, the one hanging by the stairs. I reached for it immediately, pulling it from the wall. My fingers searched behind the frame, and sure enough, there it was, a tiny brass key taped carefully to the back. I clutched it to my chest as tears filled my eyes. My husband had known. He had tried to protect us even after death. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind me. I froze, turning slowly. Clara was standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. I hid the key behind my back, just cleaning. Her eyes flicked to the clock, then to the empty space on the wall where the photo had hung. "You never clean at night," she said. Her voice was calm, but her gaze sharpened, predator-like. "What's that in your hand?" "Nothing." She took a step closer, her tone softening. "Helen, you've been through so much. You shouldn't be digging through old things. It's not good for your mind." I said, "It's nothing." Her smile returned, slow and deliberate. "Then you won't mind showing me." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then in one quick motion, I slipped the key into my pocket. "I'm tired," I said. "I'm going to bed." She stared at me for several seconds, her eyes unreadable. Then she nodded. "Of course. Rest well." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, the key pressing into my palm like a heartbeat. My husband had left me a way out, a clue, a chance to uncover the truth. But it also meant Clara's lies went deeper than I had ever imagined. She must have known about the missing copy of the will. That's why she'd been desperate to get rid of me. The next morning, she suggested a drive. "It'll be good for you," she said, smiling as she poured coffee. "You've been cooped up too long." I hesitated, then agreed. Maybe she thought I was too frightened to refuse. Maybe she wanted to keep me under her control. But I had a different plan. As we drove through the countryside, she kept up a steady stream of small talk about the weather, the garden, the renovations she wanted to make once the house was settled. I nodded absently, my thoughts racing ahead. Belmont Bank was just 10 miles from here. I could go there when she left for work tomorrow. I could open that deposit box and finally see what she had tried so hard to hide. When we got home, Clara turned to me in the driveway. "You know, Helen, I worry about you," she said softly. "If something ever happened, if you fell or forgot to turn off the stove, it would break my heart. Maybe it's time we make arrangements." I met her gaze and smiled faintly. "Don't worry, dear. I'm not going anywhere." Her expression didn't change, but I saw it then, the faint twitch of frustration, the smallest crack in her mask. "Good," she said quietly. "I'd hate to lose you." That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter from my husband spread out before me. My hands trembled as I read his words again and again. He had known she was dangerous, and now with the key in my possession, I could prove it. Outside, the wind began to rise. The lavender in the garden swayed violently, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape standing by the fence, tall still, watching. My heart pounded as I went to the window. The yard was empty, only shadows, only the restless whisper of leaves. But as I turned away, I noticed something on the kitchen counter, a new cup of tea steaming gently waiting for me. I hadn't made it. If you were in my place, would you drink it to keep up appearances or pour it down the drain? Comment 1 if you'd take the risk, or hit. Like if you'd trust your instincts and refuse. By morning, the tea was still there, cold now, untouched. I stared at it for a long time, wondering what might have been swirling beneath the surface the night before. I didn't need proof. My gut already knew. That cup wasn't kindness. It was insurance. Clara wanted to be sure that when I finally broke, no one would question it. But she had underestimated me. I'd spent a lifetime cleaning up other people's messes, my husband's debts, my son's broken heart, my own grief. What she didn't know was that women like me don't crumble, we collect. We observe, we wait. At 8 a.m., Clara announced she had errands to run in town. The realtors drawing up the preliminary sale documents, she said, buttering her toast with surgical precision. We should have offers by next week. I nodded, pretending not to hear the word we. When her car finally disappeared down the road, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. I grabbed my purse, slipped the brass key inside, and stepped out into the morning fog. Belmont Bank was old, its limestone facade cracked with time. I remembered coming here decades ago with my husband, back when life still made sense. The same clock ticked above the door, still a minute slow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polish. The teller, a young man with kind eyes, looked up. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, steadying my voice, "under the name Helen Whitmore." He checked the system, nodded, and disappeared for a moment. When he returned, he held a clipboard. "We have a box registered under that name. Yes. May I see your identification?" My hands shook slightly as I handed over my old driver's license. He glanced at it, then led me to a small private room lined with polished steel drawers. He inserted a key, then gestured for me to do the same. My fingers fumbled, but the brass key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic sigh. When I lifted the lid, the scent of old paper filled the room. Inside were several neatly folded documents, a small envelope, and a sealed flash drive labeled Lewis. My breath caught. My husband had known everything. I unfolded the first paper. It was the original will dated 2 months before Lewis's death. It clearly stated that his estate was to be placed in a trust for his unborn child, with his mother, me, listed as temporary guardian if anything happened to both parents. Clara's name was there too, but her access was restricted. She could only receive a monthly allowance contingent on proof of moral conduct and guardianship approval. My son had protected his family from her even before he died. The second document was an insurance notice marked Beneficiary Change Pending, dated 3 days before the accident. Lewis had been about to remove Clara as his sole beneficiary. I felt dizzy gripping the edge of the table. This was it. Proof, not just of her lies, but of her motive. She had known she was about to lose everything. That's why she'd acted. I opened the small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, the ink faded, but still legible. If you're reading this, Mom, then I couldn't protect you the way you protected me. Clara isn't who she says she is. She's been meeting someone, a man named Peter. He helped her arrange something about my car. I'm scared, but I can't go to the police without evidence. If anything happens to me, find her and find him. Don't let her raise our child. Love, Lewis. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the letter. There it was in his own handwriting, proof that my son knew she might kill him. The flash drive suddenly felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. I slipped everything back into the envelope, tucked it inside my coat, and hurried out. The fog outside had thickened. The air felt heavy electric. I checked the street twice before crossing, my heart pounding like a drum. Clara's car wasn't anywhere in sight. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every sound, the hum of engines, the crackle of leaves felt amplified. At home, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and plugged the flash drive into my old laptop. A folder opened instantly. Inside were a dozen video files. The first one started automatically. Lewis sat in his car, eyes red, voice shaking. Mom, if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. Clara's been lying. She told me she lost the baby, but last week I found medical documents that said otherwise. She's seeing someone. His name's Peter Voss. I think she's planning something. I don't know what yet, but if anything happens to me, promise me you'll find the truth. The video cut out, leaving only static. My whole body went cold. There was no question anymore. Lewis hadn't died in an accident. He'd been silenced. I played the next clip. It was a recording from a security camera, grainy but clear enough. It showed the front of a small auto repair shop. A woman stepped out of a silver car. Clara. She handed an envelope to a man in greasy overalls. They spoke for a moment, then shook hands. A date stamp glowed faintly in the corner 3 days before the crash. My breath came fast and shallow. The world was spinning, but everything inside me was razor sharp. This was the evidence the police never had. The reason Lewis died. I sat back in the chair, tears sliding down my face. I found it, my love, I whispered. I found what you wanted me to see. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear. It was purpose. Cold, clear, and burning. I had been on the defensive too long. It was time to turn the tables. That night, Clara came home late. I was sitting in the living room, the envelope resting on my lap. When she walked in, she hesitated. You're up, she said, forcing a smile. I couldn't sleep, I replied. I've been thinking about Lewis. Her face softened instantly, an act I could tell. Oh, Helen, I miss him too. Some nights I still dream about him. I watched her carefully. Funny, I've been dreaming about him too. He keeps asking me why you lied. She froze for half a heartbeat, then forced a laugh. You should rest, Helen. You're letting grief twist your memories. Maybe, I said, standing slowly, but grief doesn't explain a transfer of $350,000 3 days after his funeral, does it? Or the fact that Lewis changed his will, or that you met a mechanic named Peter before the accident. For the first time, her mask cracked. What did you say? You heard me. She blinked, her composure flickering like a candle in the wind. Then she smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. You've been busy. I found everything I said. And soon the police will, too. Her smile vanished. You won't make it that far. I stepped back instinctively. What do you mean? She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way a cat studies a cornered mouse. I mean, you're tired, Helen. Old, confused. Maybe tonight you'll have an accident. Maybe the gas stove will be left on. Or maybe you'll slip in the garden. I felt my blood run cold, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. You won't touch me. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, stepping closer. I already have. Her breath smelled faintly of mint and malice. For a moment, I thought she might actually do it, end it right there. But instead, she smiled again, serene as ever, and walked upstairs. I stood in the silence, shaking, gripping the edge of the table to stay upright. She thought she'd broken me. She thought fear would silence me. But she was wrong. I wasn't the helpless old woman she imagined. I was a mother with nothing left to lose. When I was sure she was asleep, I locked myself in my room and called Detective Morales, the officer who had handled Lewis's accident. His number was still written in the back of my address book. He answered groggily. "Detective Morales," I whispered. "This is Helen Hughes. You investigated my son's death 2 years ago." There was a pause. "Mrs. Hughes." "Yes, I remember. What's this about?" "I have new evidence," I said. "A video, a will, letters, everything. Lewis was murdered, and I know who did it." He asked questions when, where, how, but I told him I'd explain in person. We agreed to meet the next morning at his office. I hung up my hands, still trembling, but my mind was clear. Tomorrow would change everything. Before going to bed, I looked at the envelope again. I pressed my fingers over Lewis's handwriting and whispered, "I'm coming for her, my darling. For both of us." If you were me, would you go to the police immediately or make her confess? First comment 1, if you'd go straight to the cops or hit, like if you'd wait and let her trap herself. The next morning, the sky was the color of bruised steel. Thick clouds pressed low over the house, making the air feel heavy charged. It didn't just look like rain, it looked like a storm that had been waiting for years. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. I spent the night sitting in my chair clutching Lewis's letter until dawn. Every word felt like it had been carved into my bones. She's been meeting someone, a man named Peter. My car. I must have read it 100 times. Each reading made the truth sharper, clearer, more unbearable. At 7:30, I dressed carefully, a gray cardigan, neat slacks, and the pearl earrings Lewis had given me for my 60th birthday. I wanted to look calm, rational, respectable. I needed the world to see that I wasn't some fragile widow losing her mind. I was a mother, seeking justice. The detective had asked me to bring the evidence to his office at 10. I packed everything into a large brown envelope, the will, the flash drive, Lewis's handwritten note, and placed it in my handbag. But before I left, I had one more thing to do. I wanted her to know. Clara was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, her hair tied back neatly, humming softly as she sliced apples. She looked almost serene, like she hadn't spent the previous night threatening me. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I said evenly. She looked at the handbag on my arm. "Going somewhere?" "Yes, I have an appointment in town." Her knife paused mid-slice. "With whom?" "An old friend," I lied. "Just some paperwork I need to finish." She set the knife down, wiping her hands on a towel. "Do you want me to drive you?" I shook my head. "I need the walk." Her smile tightened her eyes, flicking briefly to the window where the sky was darkening. "It's going to rain. You shouldn't go alone." "I'll manage." We stared at each other for a long moment. Neither of us blinked. Then she picked up the knife, again, the blade flashing under the kitchen light. "Suit yourself," she said lightly. I turned toward the door, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the sound of the knife striking the cutting board. Maybe it was the calm in her voice that frightened me more than anger ever could. I realized then that if I left, she'd find out where I'd gone. And if she found out, she might make sure I never got there. No, it had to end here, in this house, between us. I closed the door and turned back around. "Actually, Clara," I said quietly, "we need to talk." She looked up curious. "About what?" "Lewis?" The knife froze midair. "What about him?" she asked, her voice still calm but her body tense. "I know," I said, "about Peter, about the car, about the will." Her hand trembled slightly before she set the knife down. "You've been reading too many of your mystery novels again, Helen." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw the footage, the video of you paying that mechanic 3 days before Lewis died, the letter he wrote. You killed my son." Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked bored. "Killed him? That's ridiculous." "You're delirious." "He knew you were planning something," I said, stepping closer. "He tried to protect his child, his money, his name. And when he did, you decided to end him. You cut the brakes on his car." Her lips curled in a small smile. "And you think you can prove that?" "I already have." She laughed. Then a sharp, humorless sound that bounced off the walls. "Oh, Helen, you poor, lonely woman. Do you really think anyone's going to believe you? You've been telling people I poisoned you, that I buried boxes in the garden, that I sneak around at night. They already think you're losing your mind. All I'd have to do is make one phone call and the police would take you straight to a care home. I took another step forward, my pulse pounding. Not after they see what I have. Her eyes flicked toward my handbag and I realized too late that she knew. She lunged for it, but I stepped back, clutching it tight against my chest. "Give it to me," she snapped. "No." Her hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed. "You'll ruin everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I shouted. "You already did that when you murdered my son." Her grip tightened until pain shot up my arm. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You think you're the hero in this story, but you're not. You're just a bitter old woman who can't let go of the past." "I loved him," I whispered, "and you took him from me." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, guilt maybe or memory. Then it was gone. She yanked the bag from my hands, but I grabbed her arm and pulled back. The two of us struggled the handbag between us like a rope in a tug of war. Papers spilled onto the floor. Lewis's letter, the will, the flash drive. "Stop," I screamed. "Don't touch them." But she shoved me hard. I fell backward, hitting the floor, pain shooting through my hip. When I looked up, she was holding the letter, scanning it quickly. Her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter," I said, forcing myself up. "It's over Clara." She tore the paper in half. "You shouldn't have done this." Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a small iron teapot from the counter, and hurled it at her. It hit her shoulder with a dull thud, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, the torn letter fluttering from her hand. For a moment, we both froze, staring at each other across the room, the air thick with rage and disbelief. Then she smiled again, but this time it wasn't mockery. It was pure venom. "You just assaulted me," she said softly. "Do you know what that means?" "You're finished, Helen." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was spinning too fast. I watched as she calmly began gathering the scattered papers, her movements precise, clinical. She placed them on the counter, one by one, like evidence in reverse, each piece of proof being erased. And then she struck a match. The smell of sulfur filled the room. I lunged toward her, but she stepped back, holding the flame above the papers. "Don't," I pleaded. "Please." Her smile widened. "You should have stayed quiet." The match dropped. Fire licked across the documents, instantly orange, eating into white. I grabbed a towel and tried to smother it, but the heat seared my hands. The edges of Lewis's will turned black, curling in on themselves like dying leaves. I could hear Clara's laughter above the crackle of flames. When the fire died, all that remained were ashes. I stared at them, trembling, my palms blistered and red. "You destroyed evidence," I whispered. She shrugged. "What evidence? There's nothing left." But then she made her mistake. She didn't notice that the flash drive had slid beneath the counter during the struggle. I saw it, just a glint of metal peeking from under the cabinet. I kept my eyes on her face, forcing myself not to look down. "You'll never get away with this," I said quietly. "Oh, Helen," she said, brushing ash from her sleeve. "I already have." She walked toward the door, pausing only to glance back. "You should rest. You're going to need your strength for the nice men in white coats when they come for you." When she was gone, I collapsed onto the floor, shaking. My hands stung. My chest ached, but I didn't care. Inch by inch, I reached under the cabinet and pulled out the flash drive. It was covered in soot, but intact. My heart pounded. Lewis's last words were still safe. I sat there for a long time, staring at the charred remains of his letter. The smell of burnt paper filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the open window. It felt like grief all over again, raw and suffocating. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, a quiet, simmering fury. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd erased him again. But I had his voice. I had his face. And tomorrow, the world would hear it. That night, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the windows. The house creaked like an old ship in a storm. I sat at the table watching the rain fall through the darkness. The flash drive clutched in my unburned hand. Every time lightning lit the room, I saw Lewis in my mind, the way he used to laugh, the way he said, "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small, Mom." I whispered to the empty room, "I won't. Not ever again." When I finally stood, my body ached, but my resolve was stronger than it had ever been. The next day, I would walk into that police station. I would hand them the flash drive. and I would make sure Clara's lies burned brighter than the fire she had lit. If you were me, would you let her walk away for one more night or go after her before morning? Comment 1, if you'd strike first or hit. Like if you'd wait for the law to finish the job. Morning came with a sky the color of wet cement. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain and ash. My hands ached where the burns had blistered overnight wrapped clumsily in gauze. I didn't care. Pain was temporary. What I had left to do was not. I left the house before Clara woke up. Her car was still in the driveway, glistening with dew. Through the kitchen window, I saw her silhouette moving a shadow brewing coffee, calm and confident as if she hadn't tried to erase every trace of my son hours ago. Let her think she'd won. It would make her fall harder. I clutched the flash drive in my pocket all the way to the bus stop. My steps felt heavy, but my mind was sharp. I had replayed this moment 1,000 times in my head the day the truth would finally breathe again. Detective Morales' office was on the second floor of the municipal building. The same dull beige walls, the same smell of old paper and cheap coffee. When he saw me, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Hughes, you look exhausted. Are you all right?" I sat down, pulling the flash drive from my pocket. I found something, I said, my voice low but steady. "You need to see this." He looked skeptical, but plugged it into his computer. The screen flickered to life, showing Louis in his car, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling. "Mom, if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. Clara's been lying. She told me she lost the baby, but last week I found medical documents that said otherwise." The room fell silent. Morales leaned closer, his jaw tightening. When the clip ended, he exhaled slowly. When was this recorded? 3 days before his death. And the mechanic, the one named Peter, there's footage of them together, too. She paid him. Morales rubbed his chin. This could be huge, but it's circumstantial. We'd need more bank records, the mechanic's testimony. Still, he looked at me. "This changes everything. You did the right thing coming here." Before I could respond, the door swung open. A voice, smooth and familiar, filled the room. "Detective Morales, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was told you wanted to see me. Clara." She stood there in a cream coat, perfectly composed, holding a folder in her manicured hands. She looked every bit the grieving widow, subtle makeup-weary eyes, the faint tremor of practiced sorrow. My stomach turned. Morales blinked, surprised. "Mrs. Hughes, we were just talking about me, I assume." She said, gently glancing at me with feigned concern. "Helen, dear, you left so suddenly this morning. I was worried. You should have told me you were coming here." Her voice was honey, but her eyes, God, her eyes were pure ice. I stood slowly, worried you tried to burn my son's will. She gasped softly, the perfect picture of wounded innocence. "Detective, please. She's been confused lately. She's been imagining things, fires, conspiracies." She turned to me. "Helen, you told the social worker last week that I poisoned you with tea. Do you remember that?" "That's because you did," I hissed. Morales held up a hand. "Ladies, please. One at a time." Clara turned toward him, her expression pleading. "Detective, my mother-in-law has been struggling with her mental health. Since Louis's death, she's had episodes. I tried to help, but it's been getting worse. Last night she threw something at me. She needs care, not interrogation." "That's a lie," I snapped. "She attacked me, destroyed the evidence, she killed him." "Listen to her," Clara said softly. "She's lost touch with reality." Morales looked from one of us to the other, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, addressing Clara, "we have a video that suggests Louis's accident may not have been accidental." Her expression didn't change. "A video?" "Yes, recorded by your husband before his death." Her eyes narrowed slightly, almost imperceptibly. "I'd like to see it." Morales pressed play. Louis appeared again on screen, pale and nervous. The moment his voice filled the room, Clara's facade cracked. Her hand twitched. Her breathing hitched ever so slightly. When the clip ended, the silence was suffocating. She laughed quietly. "That's it. That's your smoking gun." A tired man talking nonsense into a camera, Louis was unstable. He had insomnia, paranoia. I told the coroner that. Morales frowned. "There's also footage of you at a garage with a man named Peter Voss." Clara tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Peter, oh Peter, the mechanic Louis sent me there. He said the car needed maintenance." "Convenient," I muttered. She turned to me, smiling thinly. "You always did love your stories, Helen." I reached into my handbag, pulling out what remained of the charred envelope. From inside, I withdrew a half-burned corner of the will, the only piece that had survived. Lewis's signature was still visible. And does this look like a story to you? Her mask slipped entirely then. Her eyes went sharp, cold, calculating. She stared at the fragment, her lips parting slightly before she forced a laugh. That could be anything. You think one scrap of paper proves murder? Morales' voice hardened. It proves motive. You stood to lose everything if Lewis changed his will. Clara's jaw tightened. You have no proof I changed it and no proof I hurt him. Morales leaned forward. Maybe not yet, but we can reopen the case. We'll subpoena Peter Voss. We'll check your bank transactions. That life insurance payout. She cut him off, her tone sharp. You have no right. I have every right, Morales said calmly, because this woman has just handed me probable cause. Her composure cracked completely then. You're making a mistake, she hissed. Lewis's death was an accident. He was drunk. He was careless. He never drank, I said, my voice shaking. Not once, and you know it. The room went still. Clara's breath came faster now, the rhythm breaking. Her act was crumbling. She turned to Morales, desperate. Detective, she's lying. She's been obsessed with me since the funeral. Ask anyone. She's paranoid. She even called the hospital saying I'd stolen her medication. Morales didn't answer. He reached for the phone on his desk. I'm calling the DA. We're detaining you for questioning. That was when she snapped. In one motion, she lunged across the desk, grabbing the flash drive from the computer port. You don't know what you're doing, she shouted. Clara stopped, Morales barked, but she was already backing toward the door. I stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Give it back, I said. Move, she hissed. No? Her hand trembled as she held the flash drive behind her back. For a moment, I thought she might hit me. Then her voice softened, almost pleading. Helen, please. You don't understand. I did it for him, for Lewis. He was leaving me. He was going to take everything. I couldn't let him. The confession hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Morales froze mid-step. You just said it, I whispered. You killed him. Her eyes widened as she realized what she'd done. No, I didn't mean. But it was too late. Morales hit record on his phone. Say that again, Mrs. Hughes. She went pale. I want a lawyer. After you hand me that drive. Her grip loosened and she dropped it on the floor. Morales picked it up carefully, locking it in an evidence bag. Clara Hughes, you are under arrest for the suspected murder of your husband, Lewis Hughes, and the attempted destruction of evidence. You have the right to remain silent. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just stood there, her face blank as the officer who'd been waiting outside entered to cuff her. For the first time since I'd met her, Clara had no words left. As they led her out, she turned to me. You think this changes anything, she said quietly. You think you've won. You're just as guilty as I am. I stared at her, heart pounding. The difference is I can still sleep at night. She smiled one last time, cold, mirthless, and let the officers take her away. When the door shut, the room went silent except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above. Morales let out a long breath and sat down. Mrs. Hughes, he said softly, you just helped solve your son's murder. I sank into the chair across from him, my whole body shaking. No, I said, staring at the closed door. Lewis solved it. I just followed the trail he left behind. Morales nodded. We'll get the rest of her story soon enough. The mechanic will talk once we have him in custody. And that insurance payout, well, she's not keeping a cent of it. I pressed my burned hands together. What happens now? He looked at me kindly. Now you go home, Mrs. Hughes. You rest. We'll take it from here. I nodded slowly, standing up. The hallway outside felt endless, the echo of my steps loud and hollow. Reporters would come, investigations would unfold, trials would follow. But for the first time in years, I felt weight lift off my chest. When I reached the exit, the sky had opened again, the rain falling soft and steady. I stood under the overhang for a moment, closing my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. Then I whispered to the wind, It's over, my love. She can't hurt anyone anymore. But as I turned to leave, something on the ground caught my eye, a single folded note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. In perfect looping handwriting it read, You can't bury the truth forever. My heart skipped. I looked around, scanning the empty parking lot, only rain and shadows. I slipped the note into my coat pocket. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a final trick left behind. But as thunder rumbled again in the distance, I couldn't help but feel that our story wasn't quite finished yet. If you were me, would you leave that note to the rain or open every door until you knew who wrote it? Comment 1, if you'd keep digging or hit, like if you'd finally walk away. By the next morning, the whole town knew. The story had spread like wildfire. Widow exposes daughter-in-law's secret hidden video reveals foul play. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters camped outside my gate, their microphones bobbing like vultures over a carcass. Mrs. Hughes, how did you know it wasn't an accident? Did you really keep evidence for 2 years? Is it true your daughter-in-law tried to kill you too? I didn't answer. I just stood on the porch, wrapped in my cardigan, watching them from behind the screen door. Every question was a knife twisting into old wounds. All I had ever wanted was peace, but peace, I realized, doesn't come to people who dig up the dead. The police cars came and went all morning. Detective Morales called to tell me they had found Peter Voss, the mechanic, trying to flee the state. He had confessed everything: the money Clara paid him, the sabotage, the lie about the brakes failing in the rain. It was enough to close the case. "You did it," Mrs. Hughes Morales said over the phone. "You gave your son justice." I should have felt relief. I should have been able to breathe again, but instead I felt hollow. Justice is not the same as peace. Justice doesn't bring your child back. It only rearranges the pain into something you can stand to live with. By noon, the reporters had multiplied. I could hear them calling out my name even as the sky darkened again. "Heroic mother uncovers murder," one headline read. Another called me the woman who dug for truth. They made it sound noble, cinematic, but there was nothing noble about waking up every morning to an empty chair at the breakfast table. Evelyn came over in the afternoon, slipping past the cameras with a loaf of bread in her hands. "You did it, Helen," she said softly as she set it down on the counter. "You actually did it." I poured her tea, my hands still bandaged. "I don't know what I did," I admitted. "I just followed the ghosts." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain against the windows. Then she said, "You're on TV, you know. They're calling you a hero. I don't feel like one." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to. Sometimes just surviving is enough." But I wasn't sure it was. That night, as the lights from the news vans flickered through the curtains, I looked out at the garden, the same patch of soil where it had all begun. The lavender bent in the wind rain, dripping from its petals like tears. I thought of the box of Lewis's ashes, of all the secrets that had slept beneath that earth. I whispered to the darkness, "It's over now, my love." Except it wasn't. The next day, as the world cheered my courage, something else began to shift. People who once pitied me now looked at me differently, not as a victim, but as a mystery. Some believed my story entirely. Others whispered that I'd gone too far, that I'd been obsessed, that maybe I'd planted the evidence myself. A few even said I'd provoked Clara, that I had blood on my own hands. One of the reporters shouted it straight to my face. "Mrs. Hughes, do you feel responsible for pushing your daughter-in-law over the edge?" I didn't answer. I closed the door. Inside, the house felt too big again. Every clock ticked too loudly. The silence pressed against my ears. Even the smell of coffee reminded me of Clara's poisoned kindness. Late that afternoon, Morales visited. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. "We've got her confession recorded," he said. "Peter confirmed everything. It's airtight." "I suppose that's good," I said quietly. He hesitated before continuing. "There's something else. We found her storage unit. She'd been keeping things: newspaper clippings, medical records, an old crib. She was pregnant when Lewis died." The word struck me like a physical blow. What? She must have hidden it. Maybe gave birth in secret. We're still investigating. My breath caught. A child. My grandson. Lewis's baby. All this time I'd been fighting a ghost, and there might have been a life out there that still carried his blood. Morales put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll find out the truth. You have my word." After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed, shaking. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Gray hair, matted eyes, hollow, the weight of years carved into every line. I thought I had reached the end of the story, but perhaps it had only turned a corner. By evening, the reporters were gone. The street was quiet again. The rain had stopped and the air smelled of wet earth. I stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the cold soil between my toes. The lavender glistened under the moonlight. I knelt beside it, brushing away the last bits of ash that had blown there from the kitchen fire. "People think I'm strong," I whispered, "but I was never strong. I was just too broken to stop." Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading into the night. I looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds and thought of Louis, his laugh, his voice, his stubborn kindness. I prayed that wherever he was, he finally knew the truth. If you were me, would you let the past rest or keep searching until every secret is unearthed? Comment 1, if you'd keep digging or hit, like if you'd finally stop. Clara's trial began 6 months later. By then, winter had settled over the town, covering the streets in thin gray snow and silence. The courthouse smelled of paper and coffee, of tired people chasing truth through bureaucracy. I sat in the second row every single day, my burned hands healed but still aching when the cold got too deep. Morales sat beside me, quiet, steady, a sentinel in plain clothes. The prosecution played Louis's video in full. The jury watched in complete stillness. My son's voice filled the courtroom again, trembling but clear. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it." Every word was a wound reopening. Clara sat at the defense table dressed in pale beige, her hair pulled back like an angel carved from marble. But her eyes were empty. She didn't look at me once. Peter Voss testified next. His voice shook as he confessed. "She told me to cut the brake line just enough to fail slowly. Said it was for insurance. I didn't think she meant to kill him." The room gasped. Clara's lawyer objected, but it was useless. The evidence was overwhelming. Her fingerprints on the envelope, the money transfers, the flash drive recovered from her possession. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a soundless precision that felt both satisfying and cruel. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, the years pressing down on my shoulders. "My son wasn't perfect," I said, my voice trembling, "but he was good. He trusted people. He trusted her, and that trust killed him. I only wish I'd seen it sooner." Clara didn't flinch, not even when the verdict came in, guilty on all charges. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, echoing through the room. Life imprisonment, no parole. I should have felt something, triumph, closure, but I didn't. Watching her led away in handcuffs, I didn't see a monster. I saw a hollow woman swallowed by greed, by fear, by her own lies. The system called it justice. To me, it felt like ashes. Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed again, shouting questions. Morales guided me through the crowd, his hand firm on my arm. "It's over now," he said softly. But we both knew over was a word that only sounded good in headlines. The days after the trial felt strange, quiet, too quiet. The phone stopped ringing. The neighbors stopped whispering. For the first time in years, my house was truly silent. I could almost hear the echo of my own breathing. Evelyn came by one evening with soup. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like winning a war after everyone's already dead," I said. She nodded. "You did what you had to do." "I did what any mother would have done," I whispered, "but it doesn't bring him back." For weeks I tried to rebuild a routine. Morning tea, reading by the window, tending to the lavender that still grew stubbornly in the cold. The press lost interest. The town moved on, but I couldn't. The note I'd found on my car, the one that said, "You can't bury the truth forever," still haunted me. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It wasn't from the court nor from the police. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat and unfamiliar. Inside was a single piece of paper and a photograph. The photograph showed a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The note beneath it read, "He's safe. He's yours if you still want him." My vision blurred. I read it 3 times before I could breathe again. There was no signature, no address, just a postmark from a small coastal town 200 miles away. I drove there the next morning. The sky was clear, the road long and silent. Every mile felt like a heartbeat. When I arrived, I followed the directions scrawled faintly on the back of the photo to a small foster home near the water. A nurse met me at the door, her expression gentle. "You're Helen Hughes?" she asked. "Yes." She smiled. "We were told you might come. He's waiting inside." And there he was. a small boy with dark curls and eyes too wise for his years. He looked up at me from where he sat on the floor holding a wooden toy car. My heart stopped. Louis's eyes, Louis's mouth, Louis's spirit. "What's his name?" I managed to ask. "Hector," the nurse said softly. "His mother left him here 2 months ago." Mother. Clara. My breath caught. She had hidden him, kept him secret all this time, maybe even loved him in her own broken way before the guilt became too heavy. I knelt down slowly, tears blurring my vision. "Hello, Hector," I whispered. "I'm your grandmother." He stared at me for a long moment, then reached out his tiny hand and placed it on my cheek. The warmth of his touch shattered something inside me, something frozen too long. I began to cry, not the quiet tears of grief, but the messy, gasping kind that felt like life itself clawing back in. The nurse smiled. "He's been waiting for you." I stayed at the foster home for 3 days, going through the paperwork, the background checks, the endless questions. When they finally handed me the approval forms, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely sign my name. Driving home with Hector asleep in the back seat, the world looked new again. The same road that had taken my son now gave me something back. Not redemption maybe, but a reason. When we reached the house, the garden was blooming again, lavender, wild, and fragrant, despite the frost. I carried Hector to the window where the light fell soft and golden. He opened his eyes, blinking at the flowers. "This was your father's favorite place," I whispered. "He used to say lavender means hope. It keeps growing even when the season says it shouldn't." He didn't understand, not yet, but he smiled, and in that small, perfect smile, I saw everything Louis had ever been. That night, I tucked him into bed in the room that had once belonged to his father. The house, which had felt like a tomb for so long, finally exhaled. The air felt lighter, warmer. I sat by the window long after he'd fallen asleep, watching the moon rise over the lake. Its reflection trembled on the water like a heartbeat returning. Justice had cost me everything, but it had also given me a second chance to love, to protect, to rebuild. Maybe that was the truest kind of justice after all. If you were me, would you tell him the truth when he's older or let the past stay buried? Comment 1. If you'd tell him everything or hit, like if you protect him from the pain forever. 5 years have passed since that winter. The lavender garden has grown wild now, spreading across the yard like a quiet rebellion. The house, once heavy with ghosts, hums again with laughter. Hector's laughter. Every time he runs through the hallway, every time his little feet patter against the wooden floors, I remember what it felt like to lose everything, and what it means to start over. He's 7 now, curious and bright. He asks endless questions about the world, about the stars, about the man in the photo on my mantel. "Grandma," he says, pointing was "Daddy brave." I always pause before I answer. I look at that picture, Louis smiling, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on Clara's shoulder, and I feel 1,000 emotions rise like waves. "Yes," I say finally, "your father was the bravest man I ever knew." Sometimes he asks about his mother, too. The first time I almost couldn't breathe. "Why can't I see her?" he asked softly. "Did she go far away?" "She made mistakes," I told him, choosing my words carefully. "But she loved you in her own way." He nodded, accepting the simple truth a child could hold. But one day, I know he'll want more. He'll want the whole story, the pain, the betrayal, the fire. And when that day comes, I'll tell him. I won't spare him from the truth, because truth, no matter how dark, is the only thing that keeps us from repeating what broke us. The town has mostly forgotten the headlines. The reporters have moved on to newer scandals. Morales retired last year. He still sends Christmas cards. Evelyn visits on Sundays with fresh bread and gossip. The world, it seems, continues. But in the quiet hours when the sun bleeds orange across the lake and the wind carries the scent of lavender through the open window, I still feel Louis with us. Sometimes I imagine he's sitting right there at the table watching his son trace shapes in his notebook. "Hector draws cars, always cars. I'm going to build one that never crashes," he said once, his small hands sketching fast and sure. I smiled through tears I didn't want him to see. Every evening we walked to the lake together. The same lake where the story began, where I once saw Clara burying her secret under moonlight. Now the water is calm again, reflecting the sky like polished glass. The past has sunk deep beneath it, but I no longer fear what sleeps there. I've learned that not all things buried are meant to stay hidden, and not all that's found must be feared. I sometimes bring a single sprig of lavender and toss it into the water. It floats for a moment before sinking slowly, gracefully disappearing into the ripples. That's my prayer, my offering, my reminder that even from soil stained with grief, something fragrant can still grow. The neighbors call me strong, resilient, lucky, but I'm none of those things. I'm just a woman who refused to look away, who chose truth over comfort, justice over silence. And if I've learned anything from this long, brutal story, it's this: secrets rot in the dark. Love survives in the light. Hector doesn't understand the full meaning yet, but one day he will. I'll make sure of it. I'll teach him that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing to stop bleeding even when the wound is still open. I'll tell him that dignity doesn't come from never falling. It comes from standing again after the world has buried you. And maybe when I'm gone, he'll come back to this house, the lavender blooming, the lake shimmering, and he'll remember that his grandmother fought not for revenge, but for truth, for him. Tonight he's sleeping peacefully upstairs. I sit by the window watching the moon glide over the water the same way I did that terrible night years ago. Only now the reflection doesn't frighten me. It soothes me. I whisper softly into the still air, "We made it, my love. Your son is safe. He's growing laughing, living. You can rest now." The wind stirs through the lavender, bending the stalks as if bowing to the moon. And for the first time since that night by the lake, I feel something close to peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. Because some stories don't end when justice is served. They end when love finally stops being afraid. If this story found its way to your heart, if it reminded you that even broken people can save something beautiful, leave a comment. Tell me if you'd have done the same. And if you believe, as I do, that truth always floats back to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried, then let the world know. Because this was never just a story about murder. It was about resurrection, about how love, when tested by darkness, still chooses to bloom.